growing up in a small town is this really isolating feeling of feeling like lonely, but constantly surveilled, while also being like never really seen or understood.
If I were to say small town to you, what would you respond? Like, are you like, yay, small town? Or are you like, oh, get me out of there? I don't know where I stand. I mean, like, I'm probably more on the get me out of there, but there is also something that's quite appealing to me about a small town. I quite like the idea of existing in this close-knit community. Yeah, maybe not, actually. I don't know. There's something appealing about it, but overall, I think that yes, some of the close-knittedness would maybe grind my gears a bit too much, and it's not something that I want to do. Anyway, the reason that I'm saying any of this at all is because this week's guest, comedian Sunny Laprade, grew up in small-town America and had kind of what you would maybe expect an experience to be for a queer kid in that kind of environment. You know, where there's this kind of social contract and everyone's expected to act in a certain way and everyone's expected to be a certain way. And there's no real opportunity to deviate from that. There's not even really an opportunity to explore deviation from that, let alone actually deviate from that. And so that's kind of weird, right? Like always feeling surveyed, always feeling as though you're performing for these people around you. Until, that is, you find a space where you can just be, where you don't feel as though you're performing your gender or you're performing your sexuality or you're performing this kind of hyper bland. Sorry, that makes it sound like I'm saying people in small towns are bland. I'm not. But you know what I'm saying? Like when you're performing this version of yourself that you think everyone wants you to be. And we got together and she told me all about this space. But before we get in, there's a few things I need to tell you. First is, we had this really interesting conversation about pronouns and moving between pronouns and how it feels to move between pronouns. And I've never really discussed that with anyone, so I found that really insightful and I hope you do too. And second of all, I know I've said this before, but it took us quite some time to get to talking about the lost space because we really got into Sunny's background and Sunny's story. So, apologies for that. But I mean, if you've listened to this show before, you know what I say. This is Lost Spaces, the show that on its surface is about lost queer spaces, but actually is about the people that went there and how they navigated the world, how they navigated their queerness and how they came to be the beautiful, flowering enigmas that they are when they come to talk to me. Oh, I'm getting a bit flowery with my language. My name's Kay Anderson. I am your host today. And why don't we get into Sunny's story?
I was born in New York City, and then my parents were long distance for like my whole childhood.
How long?
They lived 6 hours apart.
Okay.
So one of them lived in New York City, and then the other one lived still in New York State, but in a small town of like less than 5,000 people, 6 hours west of the city.
Okay. And New York State is like this really weird shape, right?
It is. It's a super weird shape, and it's like way bigger than people think it is.
Yeah. Okay, so you were born in New York City.
Yeah. And then because my parents were long distance, I split time between the two. My dad was a freelancer, and my mom was a college professor. And so because of that, like during times when college was in session, I would be upstate with my mom, and my dad would come back and forth whenever he didn't have freelance work going on. And then during breaks from college, we would be in the city. So I spent most of my time upstate.
But what a difference then to be like in a small town versus the biggest, no, not the biggest, one of the biggest cities in the world, which I'm going to make you choose. Sorry if you hate being forced to choose between the two, but which do you prefer?
The city, 100%. When I was a little kid, I definitely liked being upstate more because, like, you know, I was going to school there, so all of my friends were there. And then also, when you're a really little kid, you love having, like, space. I was running around through fields and in the creek, playing imaginary games and building tree forts and stuff. But then when I got older, and, like, certainly now, there's something so isolating about life in a small town, especially when, like, I didn't own a car, and everything was so far apart that you kind of can't get anywhere unless you can drive. And there was nothing to do. My town was so small, like, we didn't have a movie theater, we didn't have a grocery store, we didn't have Mexican food, you know, the three main pillars of life.
That's the barometer I always use,
Yeah. And so when you get older in a town like that, like, you really start to feel pretty trapped.
But okay. So even if you had a car, would you not have felt trapped? Is that what you're saying?
If I had a car, I would have felt less trapped, but I still would have felt trapped because where can you go? Like, it was beautiful. It's like a very pretty place, and I do miss living in the city now. I miss the space. This is a weird thing to say, but I miss being able to scream, because there's so much nothing back home. Like, in the pandemic, you didn't really have to carry a mask back there because, like, if you were going in somewhere, you would. But outside, there was so much space that you wouldn't run into people that you didn't know. Like, you could go walk for miles and you wouldn't see anyone. And so,
but talk to me about the screaming thing then. As someone who has not partaken in that as a hobby, as a release, maybe?
As a release,
like,
yeah.
Is it a spontaneous thing, or do you say, I've got to go to the fields because I need to scream?
It was definitely more spontaneous, although sometimes you go for a walk because you're feeling angsty, and then partway through you're like, oh, I need to go out into the boonies to be able to scream.
And when do you know when you're done?
You kind of feel it, you know? You feel it, like, in your bones a little bit. Also, your throat goes out, so there's that. But, like, here I can't.
Your body gives up on you.
I can't. People will hear me, you know?
But have you ever tried smothering your face with a pillow?
Frequently.
We could do it now.
It's not the same. And I still get nervous about people hearing it because, like, I can hear my neighbors through the wall all the time.
Okay, yeah.
I don't need my very kind, lovely neighbors who are really good cooks to be able to hear that, you know?
But maybe if they heard you screaming, they'd be like, oh, maybe we should take over some cooking, like, to, you know, make them feel better.
And that would be lovely because I had their cooking one time and I think about it constantly.
Okay, well, you're going to have to concoct some kind of plan to get in with them so that they're bringing around food more often.
I know.
Maybe like put on a fake broken leg cast. And be like, oh, I'm bed bound. I can't go out.
But
and
if you have any more of that gumbo.
Yeah, that's going to work, definitely. I can't see it going wrong. Anyway.
I think that I've tried to be a good neighbor because being in my tiny, tiny hometown, you know everyone. And so, like, I was very neighborly. And even living in the building that I was growing up in Brooklyn as a kid, everyone in the building we were friends with. And so moving here in your 20s and moving into like an apartment building with a ton of units where people don't really talk to each other is like kind of jarring. And I miss being a good neighbor a little bit. I every once in a while I will like bring each other cookies. My neighbors across the hall, I'm like chill with, and I'm happy about that.
Oh, yeah, I'd rather just not talk.
And most people are like that. I understand that that's my weird small townness coming out. But
yeah, I mean, maybe we all need to be more neighborly. Maybe I need to be more neighborly. I think I've just adapted to the city and
there's levels.
Like, yeah, okay.
There's levels to it. Like my neighbors in my hometown would sometimes come in without knocking or like letting you know. And, and so that would, I'm like, I don't need that again. But I do want to like know your name and stuff.
But okay, there's some place that my mind is going when I think about living in a small town, everyone knowing your business, everyone knowing your family, like what's going on, everyone gossiping. And it makes me feel really claustrophobic and it makes me feel really worried.
Yes. And that's exactly what it's like to grow up in a small town. And my mom specifically is so outgoing. She's a lovely woman. She has a really big personality. And so because of that, everyone in the town knew exactly who she was, which meant that by extension, everyone knew me as her kid. And so there was nothing that I could do that wouldn't get back to her.
I'm not necessarily thinking about actions or like specific actions. I'm thinking about like a way of being. Like when I grew up, I was always very aware of being surveyed and people passing judgment on me. And that's one thing when you're never going to see that person again and you just happen to be in line at the checkout at the supermarket, whatever. Like, who cares if you're judging me? Oh no, that's not true. I still care. I'm going to go home and overthink it. But like, it's a completely different thing if it's someone who has multiple connections to me. And I feel like as a result, I need to survey my behavior and I need to survey who I am.
Yeah.
And this is my elaborate way of asking, did you have that experience?
That is actually all I experienced. There was nothing that you could do unless you were completely alone that wouldn't be known by everyone within the next 48 hours. And so that creates this very like homogenized culture because no one wants to be the one person who's doing something outside of the normal, because then you get known as that person. And you get like a nickname. Small towns love nicknames. I got called Subi for a while because I drove my mom's Subaru.
And there were no other Subarus in the town.
Well, I got caught doing some stuff in the back seat of that Subaru, which is kind of where the nickname came from.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's like things like that would just spread like wildfire. And so everyone knew. The first time someone in my grade had their first kiss, everyone knew all the details within 2 days.
Oof.
Any small type of relationship drama, anything that anyone did to screw someone else over or be outside the norm was gossip, because there's nothing else to do other than gossip. And then on top of that, I was there, going to high school, and it was pre-K through 12th grade all in one building. So you would be in the same school with the same group of people when you graduated high school that you had been with when you were learning how to read.
Yeah.
And so because of that, like any small beef that you have with someone has a way of not going away. I do think on the one hand, I got pretty good at getting along with people publicly who I don't like. Like I'm very good at being able to share a space with someone that I have problems with, but I also think that it made me really bad at any type of like conflict resolution because it was better to just not bring stuff up.
Okay. So the way that you would deal with conflict is just to be like, oh, I'm just going to shrink back. I'll just like remove myself from the situation.
Right. Because there can't be any conflict because then all anyone knows is that conflict.
And when you say anyone, do you mean the other person that's in the conflict with you or every single person?
Every single person. Because if I'm throwing out two hypothetical names here, if like Annie and John got in a fight, right? By the next day you get to school, the whole building knows that Annie and John are fighting. And so then it becomes, oh, well, Annie and John don't like each other. And then because high schoolers are assholes, anytime that Annie and John are in the same room together, people are like looking like, oh, are they going to start fighting? Are they going to make up? Are they whatever? And like people will egg them on. And so then it becomes like a known state of being in a way that's hard to get rid of.
But what if John's just a real asshole?
And many, many times John was a real asshole. But you can't just be like, well, fuck John, I'm writing him off. Because you have, calculus with John 3 times a week. You and John are in marching band together. You play the same instrument. So you're going to be sitting next to him at least 2 times a week.
Okay, well, I would never join marching band, just for the record.
Well, at my school, if you joined regular band, you were automatically put into the marching band for 2 years. So being a saxophone player, had to be in the marching band. We played Thrift Shop 1 year. And then the second year we played Dynamite by Tayo Cruz.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Okay, so yeah, and I get that, but that's about interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, so about like being on my own, one of my friends wore a V-neck to school once and then was gay forever. And I will say, he is gay now, but at the time, he was not. He had a girlfriend and everything, but it didn't matter because he wore that V-neck one time. And so, like, because everyone dressed the same and does the same things, if you stick out in any way, that kind of becomes what people identify you with. And so, like, I wanted to look as normal as I could so that I didn't have anything that like made me stick out. And so even in my personal life, like when I was alone, I was just trying not to stand out so that no one on the street would notice that I was doing something different. And so what that looked like for me was a lot of not paying any attention to my appearance in a way that required so much attention. Like I would get my hair cut by my neighbor because she would do it for free and I didn't care what my hair looked like. And so it was just like super short. I didn't part it. I didn't put any type of product in it. I just woke up and that's what it was. And I wore the same outfit every day, which was a t-shirt that I had got from a sporting event that I did, a hoodie, and jeans, and the same pair of shoes. One time I made the mistake of getting shoes that had a little bit of pink on them, and then that like became part of my thing for the next year. It made me really be like, okay, well, I'm not gonna care about anything other than the fact that what I'm wearing is comfortable. And it also made me want to spend less time outside because I didn't want people to be able to see me or perceive me at all. So I spent a lot of time like playing video games in my parents' house or going places where I thought no one could find me.
Screaming in the field. But
Screaming in the field.
This fear of being pointed out as different and being like ostracized as a result, was that because you just like didn't want to stray from the pack? You didn't want people to like point you out as being different? Or was it because you knew you were different and you were trying as much as you could to stamp that out?
I think that those two things are pretty inextricably linked because like I knew that there was something different about me. I couldn't necessarily place what it was, but there was something. And I knew that whatever that thing was, it was bad. And then on the other hand, I already felt bad because I knew that I was different. I didn't want other people to notice that, because then...
To notice that you felt bad or to notice that you were different?
To notice that I was different. I think that... And I think both. I think that like most people, I didn't want to notice that I was feeling bad. But like certain people, like you have a way when you are a queer child of finding other queer children when you don't have the language for that yet, right? Like no one that I was friends with in high school was out in any capacity. Pretty much all of them are now. And so like those people that I was really close to, people that I was like dating, or people that I wanted, you know, the people that I trusted.
People that you were in the back of a Subaru with.
That I was in the back of a Subaru with, exactly. Those people could know that I felt bad, that I felt like something was wrong, but only in like a text message at 1 a.m, or like in the backseat of a car after we had been talking for 3 hours or whatever. And so like there were a few people that I kind of let into I didn't tell anyone that I thought that I was like queer or different in any type of way, but there were people who were kind of cued into the fact that I felt like I didn't belong. But most people, I didn't want to know that, because I'm already feeling this weird ostracization that's like kind of self-imposed. I don't want that to then become an external thing where other people notice it. And so I had like friendships and stuff with people that I had nothing in common with, and like, you know, maybe not deep friendships, but like casual friendships with people that I didn't even really like, just because I wanted...
John.
So, exactly. Just because I wanted so badly to fit in and for no one to notice that there was something like quote unquote wrong with me. And so I played a lot of sports because that was like what the normal boys did. And like,
how interesting.
And I got really into it. I was really good at sports for a while.
And if we flash forward to now, I'm going to dub those traits like people-pleasing traits. So
that's fair.
It might not be like exactly right, but it's a shorthand. Are you still a people-pleaser?
Yeah, I would like to think that I've gotten better. That like I give less time and energy to people who I don't like, but I definitely still am. Like I will let people, you know, speak to me or address me in ways that I don't love or I'm not super comfortable with, just because I'm not trying to like cause any type of scene in public. And I do think that like, especially being in comedy spaces, which are still predominantly dominated by like cis straight men, there's this reputation that I'm very aware of that like queer people or transgender people or specifically trans women can't take a joke or don't have a sense of humor. And so like I'm so hyper aware of the fact that like in a lot of these spaces I am the only one. I am the only trans woman. Sometimes I'm the only woman in a space. And I'm like aware of what that means for me. And so sometimes there will be a crack where I'm like, you know, I'm not super comfortable with it, but I have to laugh that off so that they don't think that I'm being like a party pooper in this moment. And that's like a trait that I kind of wish that I could get rid of on the one hand, but on the other hand, I do think like it gets me more time in those rooms. Do I want to be in those rooms? I don't know, but it seems important to my career or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm saying it's fascinating, not as a judgment, just as that it's the total opposite of me, right? Like, even when I'm trying to be like, hey, yeah, that's great. Oh, yeah, you're so funny. Like, it comes across really inauthentically and no one believes me. And actually, even when I'm being authentic, I think just because my voice is the way that it is, everyone just thinks I'm really bored and I'm like not interested. So my experience is always that people think I'm noping out of everything. And like most of the time I am. But I just have that experience of not being able to hide when I'm like not interested in someone or a thing or something that's happening.
No, I think I've gotten very good at it. I don't think that's a good quality, but I think it's one that I have.
Well, I don't know. Like, if you deploy it in the correct way, then what's wrong with it?
I mean, yeah, I will have moments where I'll be out with a friend and someone will come up to us and be like, oh my God, Sunny, hi. And we have a full conversation. And then that person leaves. And my friend is like, oh, it's so cool that you ran into that person. Who is that? And I will be like, I have no idea. Not a single memory of who that is. But I will greet anyone who comes up to me and says my name as if we know each other. I am treating you like we are close friends.
No, that's weird. So you're not going to be like, just jog my memory. Who are you again?
Nope, because they clearly know me.
Well, and so do you not like lay little traps to try and get them to tell you without outright
No, because then
asking?
they find me out. Then they know.
Okay, I'm gonna challenge you to do something. So the next time this happens, just really quickly say, oh, just jog my memory. How do we know each other? See what happens.
Yeah. And if I get punched, I'm calling you.
Who would punch you? Like what?
Yeah. And you know, I doubt I would get punched, but my brain has a lovely little way of jumping to the worst possible scenario.
Yeah. Well, okay, maybe don't do that then. Who cares what I have to say? Like, if it's not hurting anyone, just go along with the tirade.
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, you were talking about how you always knew you were different, but you weren't quite sure how you were different. When did that crystallize?
It's like kind of a long process. Like, if you look back, I started doing stand-up when I was 15, and there's videos of my first like couple years of sets, and if you look back, all of those jokes are like, maybe I'm gay, maybe that's what it is, or being like, I'm not gay but I think about it. My whole first like 10-minute set is me being like, I thought I was gay, but in reality, when you are a pubescent teenage boy, anything will turn you on, and so you can't put too much thought into it. That was my take as a 15-year-old. And so I thought for a while that I was gay. And then I was
okay,
still...
well, just like, sorry to interrupt you there. When you were doing these stand-up sets, and presumably your friends and like people around you were watching you, did anyone just pull you aside and say, do you want to have a chat?
One person did. My like friends from school didn't think anything of it, because there is something so ingrained in like straight male humor that being gay is funny.
Uh-huh.
And so, like, none of them really thought anything of it, as far as I know, because, like, half the jokes at school are cracking jokes about someone else being gay or you or whatever.
Yeah.
And, like, so I had taken that as, well, people are already making jokes about me being gay, and getting defensive is just going to, like, prove that. But if I'm like, oh, yeah, and what of it, then they're going to be like, wow, they're actually so straight that it's not a problem, which the logic doesn't make sense now. But as a teenager, that's what I thought was happening. But one of my mom's friends pulled me aside and was like, you know that you can be bi, right? You know that that's okay? And I got, like, kind of irritated. And I was like, so clearly you weren't listening to the fact that I was doing stand-up comedy and nothing that I was saying should be taken seriously. And then it wasn't brought up again. So that was kind of what it was. And I think that, like, my parents were listening and kind of had maybe thought something serious was going on. But I didn't clock that because at no point when I was going up on stage was I thinking that that was something serious or real in any way. I was like, this is something that I'm doing because it's funny.
Yeah.
And then I hit, like, senior year of high school, and I started being like, okay, maybe there is something different about me. And I think that, like, especially when you're growing up in a more conservative place, and especially for, like, men or people who are presumed to be men, it's pretty binary in terms of, like, you are straight or you are gay. And so, like, being bi didn't really seem like it didn't seem real. And so I was having this whole thing of, like, I really feel like I'm gay. Like, I feel like I am gay all the time, but I know that I am attracted to women. I, like, had girlfriends in high school. I was, like, dating women. When I was, like, thinking of things that would turn me on, it was pretty much all women. And so I was like, I don't know why I'm feeling so queer all the time, but I still have this attraction to women. And then I got to college and I kept kind of making those jokes about being like, ha ha ha, wouldn't it be so funny if I was attracted to men? And that did not fly at liberal arts college. They were like, that's not funny. That's being bisexual. You should think about that. And I remember being like, man, no one here gets my sense of humor. And then someone was like, I made a joke, which in retrospect, this is actually, I think, the funniest person that could have been my, like, queer awakening. I made a joke about how I wanted to sleep with Eddie Redmayne. And one of my friends was like, I'm going to stop you right there. If you want to sleep with Eddie Redmayne, you are bisexual. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's what that is. And I was like, whoa. And so I wrestled with that for a couple months. And then before I went home for winter break, my freshman year, I had come out as bi. And my friend had gotten me for Secret Santa and made me, like, a little zine about being bisexual. And I was like, this is it. I've done it. It's perfect. And then I go back for my sophomore year. And over the summer, I had started painting my nails, which felt very much like I spent time in my hometown over the summer, and I went to, like, parties with people that I had gone to high school with, you know? Mm-hmm. And I showed up with painted nails, and I was like, this is it. This is my moment. I get to be different in this place where I had spent so much time trying to, like, fit into this very homogenized culture. And I think that, like, part of why I wanted to fit in there so much is that, like, difference is punished. I remember in 7th or 8th grade, do you guys have Spirit Week across the pond? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have no idea. No. Okay, is it a religious thing?
American high schools have this thing called Spirit Week, where, like, for my school, it was all of our teams had a home game that week, every sports team. And so you would do all these things. You would compete with the other grades. And each day at school that week, there was a dress-up day that had like a theme. And one of our dress-up days that year was formal wear. And me and my friends had been like, it would be so funny if we showed up in women's formal wear. And then no one else did it. It was just me. And I didn't like half-ass it. I didn't show up just like, ooh, haha, I'm like wearing a skirt or whatever. I picked out a whole outfit, tights, dress, scarf, full face of makeup. I straightened my hair. I wore heels, and I didn't bring a change of clothes. And so I get to school, and immediately people are like, okay, faggot. Like, that's what that is. I see faggot, I say faggot. And so because of that, like, that feeling of instantly people clocking that I was doing something outside of the norm and, like, punishing that was like, I'm never dealing with that again. And so, like, right after that, that's when I cut my hair really short and got really serious about sports. And so I was that person then from 8th grade until I graduated high school, where I was kept my hair short, dressed the same every day, serious about sports. I get to college, I come out as bisexual, I start painting my nails.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We will get to this, going to this party with nail polish on. So the wearing this formal dress to school, was that before the stand-up or after?
Yeah, that was before.
So you were kind of leaving breadcrumbs for people.
I was. I love to be like, and I was so straight and no one knew. And I think in retrospect, people probably knew, but I also think that, like, there's something about straight culture where, because it's such the dominant culture, everything is kind of assumed to fit into that, if that makes sense. And so, like, the stuff that I was doing was weird, and it was definitely, like, outside the norm, but people actually being gay felt so far outside of the realm of possibility that I don't think that it really came up. Or it did, and I just didn't know how people were talking about me.
Yeah, I guess, like, the reason that I'm picking at this and the reason that surprises me is because kids are always sniffing that shit out, right? Like, there's so many people I've spoken to that are like, I was in a town of 30 people and everyone was like, you're different, you're gay, you're queer, and they ostracized me. So I get what you're saying in that straight culture is the dominant culture and you're presumed to be straight unless you speak up or unless you say otherwise. But actually, I think that people's sensors are so highly attuned to things that fit outside of that they're going to hone in on you if you're not those things innately.
Yeah. And that's super fair. Like, it's not like I didn't get picked on, but I do think that, like, by keeping your head down, it's a lot easier for you to get picked on less. And then I also think that, like, and this, I think, points more to, like, the difference between, like, general queerness and, like, transness specifically. But there were a lot of things that I did that were, like, pretty easy to point to as, like, explicit proof that I was not queer. Like, I had multiple girlfriends in high school that were, like, quote unquote serious relationships. I was, like, sexually active. I was the captain of the track team. I did sports all year round. I was very good at them.
You were in marching band. So straight.
I was in marching band. I was good in school without being the best. I was, like, president of the student body. So I was, like, pretty generally well liked, I think. It's very easy to pick that stuff out for someone who is already kind of on the outside.
Fringe. Yeah.
But I was trying very hard to be like in the middle. And I do think that made like my kind of weirder or more out there or like queerer traits a little harder to pin down. And especially the fact that like I was identifying myself as a comedian gave me this shield to be like, anything that I was doing because it was funny. And so like, yeah, I was talking about being queer or having queer feelings on stage, but it was very easy for me to hide behind the fact that was a joke. And after one of the shows, one of my friends came up to me and was like, that stuff was funny, but if any of that is real, we can't keep hanging out. And I was very quick to be like, and it's not.
Imagine being like, by the way, just want to let you know that if that's true, I want nothing to do with you ever again.
Yeah. And so much of that was like, people were like, it's weird. It's weird that Sunny is talking about this. But the fact that I was kind of doing everything in my life at that point, like for the bit, gave me a lot of plausible deniability. And then on top of that, like, I was so ingrained in what was happening at the time where it was like, when there's a place that's so small, it's kind of the thing where like everyone has to get along with everyone because you're going to see them all the time. So there's that. And then the other thing is like, I was the president of the student body and the captain of the track team. A lot of these people I outranked. Like I had like power over people in some of these scenarios. So it's like, it's very easy to be like, that person is weird. But at the end of the day, like, I could beat you up. So how much are you going to do about that, really?
How interesting. Okay, all right. So let's get back to the party. You've shown up at the party. You have nail polish on.
I showed up at the party. I have nail polish on. And immediately, somebody that I knew from high school, the kid whose locker had been right next to mine, was like, what's up with all that gay shit on your hands? But at that point, I was like out. And so I was like,
I think you'll find it's bi shit.
Yeah, right. I was like, actually, if you look at the colors of the flag, I was kind of just like, yeah, and that was it. And I kind of got written off or accepted in the same vein as like a lot of the other weird shit that I had been doing. It was just that now I was like pretty explicitly naming it, but it didn't seem like it took that much of a difference. And I was still able to like I didn't blow up or yell or get upset. I was able to take that comment in the same stride that I had taken all of the weird comments that I had gotten in high school. And then from there, I go back to school. My nails are painted all the time. And it is worth noting that the entire time, like, I get to college, I am in like a serious relationship with a woman. So I'm like bi pretty strictly in theory, not at all in practice. Then we get sent home for the pandemic. And at that point, I had been like spending a lot of time on the internet. And there were a lot of times when I would like a joke that someone had written on Twitter and then realize that it was written by a transgender woman. And then slowly my feed became like nothing but transgender women. And I remember thinking like, that's weird, but it's just because I think they're funny, actually. And then I was like having these feelings and I was trying to write jokes. And I realized that I was doing the same thing with my gender that I had been doing with my sexuality in high school, where I was writing jokes about like, wouldn't it be funny if I was a woman? And then I was like, last time I did this, it was because I needed comedy is a very nice vehicle to work stuff out because it doesn't feel scary, because you can always hide behind that was just a joke, the way that I did when I was in high school. But when you become aware of that, it makes it very easy to be like, well, if I'm writing a lot of jokes about something, it's probably because I have actual feelings about this thing. So I started thinking about that, and then my girlfriend was like, we should watch Euphoria together. And that show is like dumb and bad and not good, but I watched it, and it was like so much of media about transgender women or trans feminine people is like either really centered around drag, or this person is either a corpse or a joke, right? It's either like it is a dead sex worker on Law and Order, or it is Ace Ventura, where they find out that the woman is trans and then everyone throws up and that's it. And I watched Euphoria, and this is so vain, but I was like, whoa, didn't know we could be hot. Didn't know that that was an option. And so I knew. At that point, I kind of knew, but I was like, well, I don't want to take any drastic steps. So I told my girlfriend that I wanted to like try out they, them pronouns and be like he, they for just a little bit. Because I was like, maybe that'll make those feelings go away. And then I was like, well, I really like they more. So then I was they, he for a little while. And then I was like, okay, I'm fully they, them. And then I was like, well, I don't like that like people can't really see that on me. So maybe I should try women's clothes. And I started doing that. And then I was like, I actually really like being perceived as like more feminine. And so then I was like, they, she. And then I was like, I really like getting called she. And then I was she, they. And then eventually I was like, okay, this is being non-binary was fun and it's great for a lot of people, but it is time for me to stop kidding around. I have like, I had known pretty much since I came out as any type of non-binary where I was going. I just kept hoping that every step would make me feel good enough that I could stop, because being a transgender woman is a very scary thing conceptually, because you hear so much about like the suicide rates and like the abject poverty and all of this, like getting abandoned by your family and all of this horrible stuff. That's like a hard barrel to kind of stare down. And so despite the fact that I knew deep down that that would help, I was hoping that there was some kind of stopgap solution that I could have that would make it so that I could feel better without having to do the big scary thing.
And then looking back and thinking about those transitions, so from going from he, him to he, they to they, them, you know what the transitions were. In retrospect, which one was the scariest?
That is a good question. I think like he, they was pretty scary because it was the first time that I was admitting out loud that I was like deviating from binary gender. And I brought it up with my girlfriend once about being like, I think I could be he, they, because like I don't mind when people use they, them pronouns on me, like when they're talking about me in the abstract. And she was kind of like, right, but I think that that's different. I think that that's not what people who use they, them pronouns are like. Well, it doesn't matter. And so for a while I was like, you're right, actually I'm just sticking with he, him. So like that was scary. And I remember I would do this thing with her. I did this the first time that I told her that I loved her too, where I would get myself so worked up that by the time I ended up saying it, she would have fallen asleep. And then I could do it 2 or 3 times as like practice, because she wouldn't know. And then I would get to say it out loud to her, but she wouldn't hear it. And then I think I woke her up. And I was like, hey, just a heads up. And so that was really scary. And then after that, like going from they, them and wearing dresses to they, she is like not that big of a transition, you know? Like I think that the scariest ones were probably adding in a they, because that was the first time deviating from it at all.
Yeah.
And then getting rid of the he, because then that was really the time when I was like, no, I'm not a boy. But then they, them to she, her, and like all the kind of combinations in the middle there were less scary because I had already rejected being a man, which is like one of the worst things you can do, quote unquote, in the way that we view society. And so that didn't feel nearly as scary to me.
Right. Okay. We've failed. We've totally failed.
Yes.
In talking about our lost space today.
Yes.
So we need to get onto it.
Yeah.
Too sweet.
So, you know, I've been talking about how it's like hard to find time alone in the city. And then at the same time, even though you were alone in my hometown, it was hard to ever feel like you weren't being observed. And my kind of workaround for that was I found this abandoned building called South Hall. And so I remember when I found it, like when you live in a small town, you think that you know, especially as a townie, you think that you know everything about that town because you're like, I've lived here my whole life. There's nothing to do. And when I was like 12 or 13, I remember walking past this abandoned building and being like, how have I never noticed that before? And so I went to the library to try to find like the history of it in the local library. And it was hard to find articles, but then I talked to the librarian, who was an older woman, and she told me her kind of knowledge about it. And then from asking around and reading more, I kind of picked up that like it had been the old elementary school, but in the 30s and 40s, under, I don't know how much you know about American history, but under the WPA, there was this program where the federal government would create jobs by like doing public services. So a lot of it was like they would build stuff for national parks or for dams, and they would build like public schools was a lot of it. And so they built a public school for my town and the next town over. And so because of that, the old elementary school stopped being used because there was no need for it anymore. And so it just kind of sat there. And for a while, it was nothing. And then it got bought by the local university. And for a while, it was used as dorms. But then it got kind of too decrepit for them to use as dorms. So then they started using it as an art museum, which is what you do with buildings that are unsafe. And then eventually it became too haphazard even for that. And so they were like, okay, well, we're going to tear it down and build a new building. And this was sometime in the like early 2000s, maybe early 2010s was when they were like, we're going to tear this building down. But at that point, because it was pre-World War II, it had become a historical site. So legally you can't tear it down. You have to restore it. But the problem with that is that like historical sites have to be restored in a specific way to preserve them with like the standards of the time, which ends up being insanely expensive. And the local university is very small town, doesn't have that kind of money. So now they can't tear it down because it's too old. They can't repair it because it is a historical site. And so it just sits. And their solution is we will wait for it to fall down on its own, and then we will decide what to do with it. And so all the windows were boarded up, and it just sat there. And it felt so much like my little secret, you know? Like it was the thing that I could like show to people when I was trying to impress them about like, oh, I bet you've never been here before. But it also was like a place where if I was sneaky enough, I got to be completely alone. No one was going to come in. They couldn't even look through the windows because all the windows were boarded up. And so eventually I get the courage to climb in through the window. And When I first went, the window that you were climbing in through was on the first floor. And so you kind of had to climb up to get through it, and then you were in.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, they figured out that people were getting in that way. They boarded it up. So then I find a second window, and that goes into the basement. And you get in the basement, and there were desks and a rusty old mattress and like raccoon carcasses because they would fall in, and then there was no way to get out because they weren't big enough to like crawl out, and there was graffiti, and there was this giant safe like from a movie, and everything was rusted and nasty, but the wheel on the safe, like how you would unlock it, still worked. And I kept telling myself I was going to learn how to pick a lock, and I never did. It felt so private and also so full of possibilities in the way that you really need as a queer kid in a small town, because it felt like there was nothing there for me. I couldn't really be myself loudly in public spaces because I was worried about people, figuring out what I hadn't even figured out at that point. There was no place for someone like me, or at least I didn't feel that way in that town. And so it's so exciting because on the one hand, there is like an element of danger because you're in this place that you're not supposed to be in. But on the other hand, there's a real sense of freedom. Like, no one is going to find you there. You exist for the first time outside of the confines of how everyone is seeing you and talking about you, because this is a space where you are completely unobserved. It gave like some kind of spark of like life and drama and adventure to this very like dull small town life that I was living. But it also kind of gives you a sense of like, there are other people like me. You never meet them, right? But you know that you see evidence of the fact that like there are other people who are breaking into this building, and there are people doing weirder stuff than I am doing in this building. And like, none of us are meeting or speaking, but maybe the people who are in this space are feeling the same way that I am. Because that's not something that you can talk about, with other people in your life when you are so determined on being closeted and staying closeted. But I don't know, you feel the sense of connection with the other people who are hiding out in this abandoned building, and you also feel a sense of connection with like the history of the town. Like that building has been there in some iteration or another because it burned down in like 1910 since probably the 1890s. Surely there are other people who have felt like me, who spent time in these walls. And like it felt like haunted by this kind of queer presence, I guess. Growing up in a small town is this really isolating feeling of feeling like lonely, but constantly surveilled, while also being like never really seen or understood. And I think that like being in this abandoned building was a great way of being like actually alone and not surveilled, but feeling seen, feeling understood, because I have to assume that the other people who are in this space are in there for the same reasons that I am. And in reality, the people who were in that space who are other than me were probably college students doing whippets.
I imagine so, yeah.
But it felt to me like it was other people who felt like they didn't belong.
So that is us for yet another week. Thank you once again for joining Lost Spaces and me. Oh, you'd think after all these episodes I'd be like good at doing this excerpt from the episode, but no, I'm not. Anyway, if you enjoyed this chat and you want to find out more about Sunny, or if you want to go and watch some of Sunny's stand-up clips, then go and follow her on Instagram at Sunny L Comedy. That's SUNNY, the letter L Comedy. Brilliant. You can also find me on TikTok and Instagram at Lost Spaces Pod. Right, I think that's about it for this week. Is there anything else I need to tell you? No, I think that's it. Right, enjoy the rest of your week. I hope to see you back here next week at the same time. Bye for now.